Breaking news from Abuja. Nnamdi Kanu has lost his no-case submission. Judge Omotosho has ruled against him, and the court has refused his transfer to the National Hospital. What really happened inside that courtroom? Let's break it down. The Federal High Court in Abuja was unusually tense as the morning session began. The courtroom was filled with lawyers, journalists, and observers, all waiting for the highly anticipated ruling on Nnamdi Kanu's no-case submission. This was not just another legal argument. It was a turning point. For many supporters, it was a chance for Kanu to walk free after years of detention. For others, it was a test of the judiciary's resolve in one of Nigeria's most controversial trials. At the center of it all was Justice Omotosho, the man who would decide whether Kanu had a case to answer or not. On one side sat Kanu, dressed in a clean white outfit, calm but visibly strained. His eyes shifted occasionally to his lawyers, seeking reassurance. Behind him, silent but firm, were the security operatives who have become a constant shadow in his court appearances. The no-case submission was simple in its request but powerful in its implication. Kanu's legal team, led by his lawyer Maxwell Opara and others, argued that the prosecution had failed to present any solid evidence linking him to the alleged offenses. They insisted that the charges were weak, politically motivated, and should not stand in a court of law. In their view, Kanu had endured enough years in custody, health challenges, and repeated denials of bail. If justice was to be served, they argued, the case should end here and now. But as Justice Omotosho began to speak, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. His tone was deliberate, measured, and firm. He acknowledged the arguments of the defense but made it clear that he was not convinced. According to him, the evidence presented by the prosecution, though contested, was sufficient enough to warrant a full trial. In simple terms, he was saying that Nnamdi Kanu must continue to face the charges in court. The words landed heavily. For Kanu supporters, it was a blow. For the prosecution team, it was a quiet victory. But the ruling did not end there. The defense had also filed a separate request. They pleaded with the court to allow Kanu to be transferred to the National Hospital in Abuja for proper medical care. His lawyers had argued repeatedly that his health was failing in detention and that specialized treatment was urgently needed. But Justice Omotosho was not persuaded. He ruled that the application lacked merit and dismissed it. With that, he effectively shut the door on both the no-case submission and the medical transfer. The courtroom was silent for a few seconds after the ruling. It was the kind of silence that follows a heavy verdict, not confusion, but the stillness of realization. The ruling meant that Nnamdi Kanu's legal battle was far from over. It meant more court dates, more arguments, and more months, if not years, of uncertainty. Observers who had expected a dramatic end to the case were left unsettled. Some shook their heads. Others quietly scribbled notes. The journalists in the room quickly began drafting their headlines: Court denies Nnamdi Kanu's no-case submission, Judge refuses transfer to National Hospital. It was the story of the day, and everyone present knew it. For Kanu himself, the moment was personal. He sat still, his face tight with emotion, yet not broken. It was clear that he had hoped for a different outcome. His lawyers leaned in, whispering words to him, perhaps offering encouragement or quickly planning their next move. The body language told its own story: frustration, but not surrender. Justice Omotosho, for his part, maintained a judicial calm. His words were not emotional, nor did he attempt to soften the blow. He stated his ruling, explained his reasoning, and moved on. To him, this was not about politics or public opinion. It was about law and procedure, and in his view, the case was not yet over. The broader implication was not lost on anyone. The ruling signaled that the court was prepared to keep Kanu in the legal net for as long as it took. There would be no shortcut, no quick dismissal, and certainly no early exit. The trial was alive, and the judge had made sure of it. Outside the courtroom, the ripple effects were immediate. News of the ruling spread across social media within minutes. Supporters expressed outrage, critics called it justice served, and neutral observers noted the political undercurrents. The refusal to transfer Kanu to the hospital added another layer of controversy, raising concerns about his health and welfare while in custody. But inside that courtroom, what mattered most was the atmosphere that lingered after the judge's words. The sense of finality was unmistakable. The ruling was clear, and there was no ambiguity about it. Kanu would face his trial. His health requests were denied. His legal team would have to return to the drawing board. It was not just a legal decision, it was a statement of control. The judge had reinforced the authority of the court, setting the stage for a prolonged legal battle. For those who came expecting relief, it was a day of disappointment. For those who saw the trial as necessary, it was a step forward. And as the session came to a close, the tension did not fade. If anything, it deepened. The courtroom emptied slowly, with heavy conversations and whispered frustrations filling the corridors. The ruling had been made, but the story of Nnamdi Kanu was far from finished. This was only another chapter in a saga that continues to divide opinion and stir emotion across Nigeria. When the gavel fell and Justice Omotosho announced his ruling, Maxwell Opara, one of Nnamdi Kanu's lawyers. Maxwell had been in court through every stage of this trial. He had watched his client denied bail, watched his health pleas rejected, and now, watched the judge throw out the no-case submission. For him, this was not just another legal setback, it was the continuation of what he described as injustice. The moment court adjourned, Maxwell stepped out, and his anger was impossible to miss. He did not hide it. His words were sharp, his tone heavy, and his frustration poured out in front of the waiting press. He made it clear that the ruling was, in his view, deeply unfair. He began by pointing out what many in the southeast had long been asking: why was the federal government quick to negotiate with armed bandits in the north, men who carried rifles openly and terrorized villages, while Nnamdi Kanu, who according to him had not committed any crime recognized by Nigerian law, remained locked up? The question cut deep. It was not just a legal argument, it was an accusation against the system. Maxwell's voice rose as he spoke, each word layered with controlled rage. He accused the authorities of double standards. To him, this was not only about Nnamdi Kanu, it was about the unequal way justice was being applied in Nigeria. If bandits could sit at the negotiation table with government officials, he asked, why was Kanu still behind bars, pleading for his health and his freedom? He did not stop there. He turned directly to the ruling itself. Maxwell argued that the judge had failed to see the weakness of the prosecution's case. In his view, the evidence presented so far did not establish anything concrete, nothing that could justify dragging Kanu through years of legal battles. To Maxwell, the no-case submission was not only valid but necessary, and dismissing it meant prolonging a trial that had already lost credibility. Maxwell's frustration also carried a personal edge. He reminded those listening that Kanu had been in custody for years, often under harsh conditions. He had repeatedly raised concerns about his client's health, concerns that had now been brushed aside again with the denial of a transfer to the national hospital. For Maxwell, this was not simply a technical ruling, it was a decision that could cost Kanu his life. He said it openly: if anything happened to his client in custody, the responsibility would rest squarely on the authorities and the court that had refused to act. The lawyer's words traveled quickly beyond the courthouse. Within minutes, his statements were circulating on social media, quoted in headlines, and debated across platforms. Supporters of Kanu praised Maxwell for speaking boldly, for refusing to bow his head in the face of a disappointing ruling. Critics dismissed his outrage as emotional, arguing that the court was only doing its job. But no one could deny that his reaction added fire to an already heated case. Maxwell was not only speaking to the press, he was sending a message to the government, to the judiciary, and to the public. He wanted it to be known that the legal team was not giving up. He declared that they would appeal, that they would challenge this ruling at every possible level until justice was done. His words were not the quiet statements of a defeated lawyer, they were the battle cries of a man determined to keep fighting. Observers could see the weight of his anger, but they could also see his resolve. Maxwell's defiance made it clear that the defense team was preparing for a longer, harder battle. If the court wanted to continue the trial, then so be it, they would meet every argument, file every motion, and push every legal angle available. What made Maxwell's reaction stand out was the way he tied Kanu's case to the larger issues in Nigeria. He was not just talking about one man. He was talking about fairness, about selective justice, about the way the state chooses whom to forgive and whom to punish. By doing this, he turned Kanu's courtroom loss into a broader political and social question. For many listening, that was the moment the case stopped being only about one defendant and became about a system. Maxwell's anger gave voice to a frustration that has been building for years among those who feel their region has been treated unequally. It was not just a legal statement, it was a political one, delivered with the heat of someone who had reached his limit. And yet, even in his anger, Maxwell made one thing clear: the legal team would not abandon the rule of law. They would not walk away from the court process, no matter how frustrating. Instead, they would stay in the fight, using every legal means available. His message was sharp: if the state wanted a long battle, then it would get one. As the crowd around him listened, some nodding, others recording on their phones, it became obvious that Maxwell's words had shifted the mood. The judge's ruling had seemed final inside the courtroom, but outside, the lawyer's fire lit a different kind of determination. The fight was far from over, and Maxwell Opara made sure everyone knew it. When Justice Omotosho finished delivering his ruling, one fact became unshakably clear: Nnamdi Kanu's trial was not going away. The courtroom doors may have closed for the day, but the weight of the decision followed everyone outside. The legal team, the supporters, the critics, and the government all left with the same realization: this case had just entered another long phase. For Nnamdi Kanu himself, the future now looks more complicated than ever. His plea for a no-case dismissal has been rejected, which means the prosecution retains the right to continue pushing its charges. In plain terms, the judge has said, there is still a case to answer. That alone guarantees months, if not years, of legal back and forth. It also guarantees that Kanu will remain in the custody of the Department of State Services for the foreseeable future. The denial of his request to be transferred to the National Hospital raises another critical issue: his health. His lawyers have consistently argued that his condition requires urgent medical attention beyond what he receives in detention. With that plea now rejected, questions about his well-being will only grow louder. Supporters fear that keeping him in custody without adequate care puts his life at risk. The government, on the other hand, insists that the facilities available to him are sufficient. This clash between perception and official assurance is likely to dominate future debates. Legally, the next steps are somewhat predictable. Maxwell Opara and the rest of the defense team will not accept this defeat quietly. They have already signaled their intention to appeal the ruling, challenging both the decision on the no-case submission and the refusal of medical transfer. Appeals take time, and each filing opens the door to new hearings, new arguments, and new public attention. In the meantime, the main trial will continue to sit. Witnesses will be called, evidence will be debated, and the process will grind on. Politically, however, the ruling has ripple effects far beyond the courtroom. In the southeast, where Nnamdi Kanu has a strong base of supporters, frustration is deepening. Many feel that the government applies different rules to different groups, as Maxwell Opara boldly pointed out. The question of fairness is now front and center. Why negotiate with violent groups in other regions while refusing to consider relief for someone whose case is largely political in nature? That sentiment fuels discontent, and every fresh ruling against Kanu adds to the fire. The government itself now faces a dilemma. By pressing forward with this trial, it signals its unwillingness to bend or compromise. To some, this shows strength. To others, it looks like selective justice. Either way, the administration must prepare for continued scrutiny, both at home and abroad. Human rights groups are likely to raise new alarms about Kanu's health and prolonged detention. International observers, already monitoring Nigeria's handling of dissent and separatist movements, will see this ruling as another test of the nation's democracy. For Kanu supporters, the path forward is painful but familiar. Protests may grow louder, social media campaigns may intensify, and calls for his release will continue to dominate conversations. His lawyers, especially Maxwell Opara, will keep using every legal opening available. But none of these efforts guarantee quick results. Nigerian trials of this magnitude often move slowly, bogged down by adjournments and technical arguments. That means patience will be tested, and frustration will rise. Inside the judiciary, this case is now cemented as one of the defining legal battles of the decade. Few trials attract as much attention as this one. Every ruling becomes headline news, every court appearance draws massive interest, and every word from the lawyers gets dissected. This constant spotlight makes it impossible for the judges and lawyers involved to ignore the political undertones. While the court insists it is only applying the law, the public interprets every decision through a larger lens of politics, ethnicity, and fairness. The big question now is, where does this road end? If the trial continues, it could stretch on for years. If the appeals move quickly, some rulings may be overturned or adjusted. If the government chooses a political solution, such as negotiation or amnesty, that could shift everything. But as of today, none of these outcomes is guaranteed. What is guaranteed is more drama, more debate, and more divisions as the case drags on. For Kanu himself, the immediate future is a test of endurance. He remains in DSS custody, cut off from the normal world, reliant on his lawyers to speak for him. His health remains a point of worry, his freedom remains uncertain, and his fate remains tied to a slow-moving system that does not bend easily. For his supporters, each court date will feel like another battle in a long war. For his critics, it will be another chance to insist that the law must take its course. As the sun set on that day in Abuja, one reality settled in for everyone following the case: nothing is ending soon. The trial is alive, the legal team is defiant, and the government is unmoved. This is not a closing chapter, it is the opening of a longer, harder story. So what next for Nnamdi Kanu? More court sessions. More appeals. More political arguments. More tension in the country. And until the final gavel falls, whenever that may be, his name will remain at the center of Nigeria's national conversation.